In 1973, Britain's biggest truck maker launched a lorry meant to save the nation. Instead, it nearly destroyed the company. The brakes failed, the heating didn't work, the cab rolled over. Drivers called it a joke. An operator said it would only run 26 miles before breaking down. This is the story of one truck that exposed everything wrong with British manufacturing. British Leyland was drowning. By 1970, the company had become a monster that couldn't control itself. The car division consumed billions in taxpayer money and still lost. The truck division was profitable but starving for investment. Management was paralysed. Politics mattered more than engineering. The government had nationalised British Leyland in 1968, thinking state ownership would save it. Instead, it created confusion. Different brands competed against each other. AEC fought with Leyland. Guy fought with everyone. Resources were scattered. Nobody had a clear vision. The problem was the Volvo F88. This Swedish truck arrived in Britain in 1967 and changed everything. It had a turbocharged engine. It had a heater that actually worked. It had a synchronized gearbox that was smooth and reliable. Drivers demanded Volvos because they were comfortable. Operators ordered Volvos because they were reliable. The Volvo F88 was the start of what the industry called the European invasion. Scania trucks arrived next. DAF trucks followed. Swedish and Dutch manufacturers were taking over the British market. By 1973, when the Marathon launched, Volvo had already been dominating for 6 years. British Leyland saw money leaving the country. They decided to fight back with the Marathon. The plan made sense on paper, but the problem was time. The company had no money to develop a completely new truck. So engineers were told to use as many existing parts as possible. They took the ergomatic cab from 1965, the old cab design that was already 8 years old. They modified it. They raised it up on stilts to fit the big TL12 engine. They added metal skirt panels to hide the gap created by the raising. Then they put it on a new chassis. The truck looked modern on the outside, but underneath it was built from old ideas. It was a stopgap. Everyone knew it was temporary, but nobody expected how badly it would fail. Production began in 1973. The Marathon rolled off the assembly line with confidence. British Leyland believed they had a winner. The power was impressive. Road testers were amazed by the engine's strength and capabilities. But then operators and drivers started using them in real conditions on daily routes. The problems came immediately and relentlessly. The braking system was the worst offender and most dangerous. British Leyland had rushed the truck into production, despite desperate pleas from engineers warning against premature launch. The brake system used a pedal mounted in the cab connected to an actuator bolted to the chassis through a long tension cable. This cable had to be adjusted perfectly. If the cable stretched even slightly, the brakes would either bind and lock on or fail to engage completely. When a cable was loose, drivers couldn't stop properly. When a cable was too tight, the brakes would lock unexpectedly. But there was something worse. The air pipes that controlled the spring brakes were routed dangerously close to hot exhaust pipes and the engine. The heat would perish the rubber and melt the plastic fittings. When an air pipe failed from the heat, the spring brakes would lock on suddenly at full force. At highway speed, this meant a catastrophic emergency stop that could flip the truck or cause multi-vehicle collisions. Accidents happened. Some were fatal. Liability claims mounted. The heating system was so inadequate that drivers froze in their cabs during winter months on routes to Norway and Sweden. The heater had been borrowed from the smaller standard ergomatic cab. In the huge Marathon cab that had been raised up on stilts to fit the big engine, it was completely useless. Drivers reported wearing heavy Arctic parkas inside the cab just to survive long hauls to Scotland. The cab itself rolled during cornering because the suspension was too soft and not properly balanced. By raising the cab up on stilts, Leyland had made it top-heavy and unstable. The leaf springs wore out quickly anyway, creating expensive maintenance nightmares for fleet operators. The ride was hard and uncomfortable for long-distance work. Drivers complained constantly. An operator made a joke that became famous throughout the trucking industry. He said the reason it was called the Marathon was because it would only run for 26 miles before breaking down. The joke spread across the trucking community. Fleet operators heard it and repeated it. Drivers spread it at truck stops and depots. Competitors used it in sales pitches. The reputation was set within months of the first deliveries. The Marathon wasn't a truck. It was a punchline that defined an entire era of British industrial failure. Volvo and Scania understood what had happened. They watched the marathon fail. They watched British operators lose faith. They continued building trucks that worked. Their drivers were comfortable. Their trucks started in winter. Their brakes didn't fail. Their cabs didn't roll. European manufacturers had spent years perfecting their designs. They had invested money. They had tested everything. They had fixed problems before trucks reached customers. British Leyland had chosen cost over quality. The company had chosen speed over testing. The company had chosen existing parts over new engineering. The result was predictable. Operators who might have bought British bought European instead. Hauliers, who owned marathon fleets, ordered Scanias for their next purchase. The trust was broken. Once broken, it stayed broken. The failure of the marathon threatened something bigger than one truck. It threatened British Leyland's survival. The company was already losing billions. The car division was dying. If the truck division failed too, the entire company would collapse. Jobs would be lost. The government couldn't allow that. In 1976, the government made a decision. They would invest heavily in British Leyland. They would save the trucks division. They would fund the development of a completely new truck. This new truck would be called the T45. It would use state-of-the-art design. It would be tested properly. It would be built for quality. The government saw this as essential to the survival of British manufacturing. This was the moment the marathon ended. Not officially. Production continued until 1979, but the marathon's time had passed. The company had already moved on. Engineers stopped trying to fix the marathon. They poured their energy into the T45. The Marathon 2 came in 1977 with improvements. The cab was redesigned. The brakes were fixed. The heating worked. By then, the damage was done. Nobody trusted the name anymore. The marathon's failure exposed something profound about British manufacturing and industrial strategy. It wasn't just one truck that was broken. It was the whole system and philosophy behind truck development. British Leyland had suffered from chronic underfunding for years, while money was diverted to save the struggling car division. The truck division received whatever funding remained after car production demands. The company couldn't access the capital needed to compete properly with European manufacturers who had planned their truck divisions for decades. European manufacturers like Volvo and Scania had invested billions in development over years. They tested prototypes relentlessly. They didn't cut corners on quality or safety. They hired the best engineers. They listened to driver feedback. They built trucks that solved real problems for long-distance haulage. British Leyland lacked this commitment. The company lacked the resources. The company lacked the vision. British Leyland suffered from what management cynically called the not invented here philosophy. If an idea came from outside the company, it was rejected outright. If a solution came from engineers at competing companies, British Leyland wouldn't adopt it, no matter how effective. This meant the company couldn't learn from others' successes. It meant the company couldn't adapt quickly to changing market demands. It meant the company kept making the same mistakes repeatedly without correcting course. The marathon also revealed something about how Britain's industrial culture had changed by the 1970s. The company had grown from an era when reputation and heritage were everything. Leyland trucks were famous worldwide. They were exported across the British Empire and beyond. They were respected by drivers and operators globally. By the 1970s, reputation from the past wasn't enough. Customers wanted practical benefits. They wanted reliability that matched daily conditions. They wanted comfort for long hours of driving. They wanted heating that worked in winter. They wanted brakes they could trust. The marathon showed that British Leyland couldn't deliver these things anymore. By 1978, the British truck market had undergone a complete transformation that nobody could reverse. European manufacturers controlled the premium segment completely. The Swedish trucks from Volvo and Scania dominated every fleet. DAF trucks from Holland were steadily taking market share with better technology and reliability. Even Ford wasn't buying British anymore when sourcing their own truck lines. The transcontinental truck from Ford used Renault engines and French cabs. The British truck industry was rapidly losing its home market to imports. Smaller manufacturers that had built trucks for decades began to disappear from the industry. AEC was gone by 1979 after decades of production. This was particularly ironic because the Marathon itself was actually an AEC design. It had been built at the AEC Southall plant and rebadged as a Leyland. This internal brand confusion within British Leyland itself contributed to poor quality control and confusion about responsibility. Was it an AEC truck? Was it a Leyland truck? Nobody knew who to blame when it failed. Guy vanished from the market. Albion closed its factories and operations. Atkinson became history and was absorbed. Comma finished production. Thornycroft was finished completely. These were famous names with proud histories. These were companies that had exported trucks worldwide and built strong reputations, but they couldn't compete with European quality standards. They couldn't match European investment in development. They couldn't overcome the growing reputation for poor reliability and mechanical failure. The Marathon's failure accelerated this decline dramatically. It showed that even Britain's largest truck maker couldn't build a competitive truck that met modern standards. If Leyland couldn't do it with massive resources, nobody could. This message went out to the world clearly. British trucks weren't reliable anymore. British trucks broke down repeatedly. British trucks weren't worth the money compared to alternatives. Operators made decisions based on this perception, and it was reinforced by every marathon that failed on the road. The government's investment in the T45 came too late for the broader British truck industry, but it saved Leyland from collapse. The T45 was designed properly through collaboration with operators, drivers, Ogle Design, and BRS. Every component was tested before production. The C40 cab was revolutionary. Only 120 parts were needed for the entire assembly, regardless of model. 40 parts were common to every version. This meant parts could be interchanged easily and repairs were quick. The instrument cluster changed in under 1 minute. The wiper motor in under 2 minutes. The pedal box in 20 minutes. Every system was designed for rapid maintenance. The T45 launched in 1980 and won International Truck of the Year. It received universal praise from industry experts. It proved British designers and engineers could still produce world-class trucks when given proper funding and support. But the Marathon's damage was irreversible. The British truck industry never recovered from its reputation collapse. The T45 saved Leyland and kept it profitable. Yes, it exported worldwide, but it couldn't bring back dead manufacturers or restore global confidence in British trucks. By 1987, General Motors divested Bedford as AWD Trucks. By 1990, the Bedford brand was gone. By the 1990s, almost no British trucks were being built. Leyland survived because PACCAR bought the company. Under PACCAR ownership, Leyland Trucks continues to operate today, but it operates as part of a foreign company. The independence was lost. The glory was finished. The Marathon's failure happened because British Leyland was underfunded, but it also happened because the company lost touch with what customers wanted. European manufacturers understood that quality mattered. They understood that reliability was worth paying for. They understood that comfort meant drivers would stay with the company. British Leyland understood none of this when they launched the Marathon. The Leyland Marathon was one truck. It wasn't the only reason the British truck industry collapsed, but it was a symbol. It represented everything wrong with British manufacturing in the 1970s. It showed what happened when companies cut corners. It showed what happened when management rushed products to market. It showed what happened when companies didn't invest in quality. It showed what happened when reputation counted for nothing against reality. The Marathon broke in ways that a truck shouldn't break. The brakes failed, the cab rolled, the heating froze. But the truck also broke something else. It broke trust. It broke confidence. It broke the belief that British trucks were worth buying. Once that was broken, the entire industry couldn't be fixed. Today, British trucks are gone from Britain's roads. Swedish trucks roll on every highway. German trucks carry goods. Dutch trucks move merchandise. American trucks operate in specialized roles. But British trucks that were designed in Britain and built in Britain are memories. The marathon wasn't the only reason, but it was the truck that showed the world that Britain couldn't make trucks anymore, and that's a lesson that never gets forgotten.